Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are doing a special Transformation Talks edition of the show,
Yes, we are.
which, if you're new here, is our After the Amen look at the messages you hear on Sunday.
Right.
Our mission today is to take that source material and, really unpack it for your Monday through Saturday. We want to extract the core insights so you can actually apply them to your life.
Exactly. And today we have a fantastic stack of notes drawn directly from a service delivered by Transformation Ministries' own speaker, Pastor Jeffrey West.
Yeah, and the material here is just a really compelling blend. It starts with this rich historical retrospective, and then it shifts into a deeply personal challenge about faith, about patience, and really how we handle the dry seasons in our lives.
That is the exact framework we're working with today. So our sources are drawn from the March 1st, 2026 service titled Beauty for Ashes P2.
Okay, let's unpack this, because whether you are a music history buff or someone who is currently feeling just, stuck in a dry season, this deep dive has some really specific, actionable wisdom tailored for you.
It really does. What stands out immediately to me is how the historical breakthroughs, discussed at the very top of the service, serve as this perfect mirror for the structural and psychological breakthroughs we need in our everyday routines.
Yes. So let's get right into that historical piece, because the service actually kicks off with a women's history moment,
Right?
presented by Elder Richard Ross. And I love how Pastor West describes him in the notes. He calls him a teacher who gives you the nuts, bolts, the crumbs, and everything.
The crumbs and everything. I love that detail.
It's great. And his presentation focused entirely on the legacy of the legendary Dr. Mattie Moss Clark.
Yes.
Now, I know she is an absolute titan in her field, but for those of us who aren't, gospel music historians, what did the landscape actually look like before she came along?
Okay, so to really understand her impact, and she lived from March of 1925 to September of 1994, you have to look at the first half of the 20th century.
Okay.
During that era, the gospel sound was heavily dominated by soloists. Think of incredible, commanding voices like Mahalia Jackson. When there actually were choirs, the arrangements relied almost entirely on unison singing.
Meaning everyone is just singing the exact same note.
Exactly. Everyone sings the exact same note, or maybe they'd use very simple two-part textures. It's beautiful, obviously, but it had a ceiling in terms of its sonic complexity.
It could only get so big.
Right. And Dr. Clark brought something completely unprecedented to that environment because she had extensive classical training. She had studied privately and at Selma University.
I really want to pause on that classical training aspect, because the notes highlight that she took that background and introduced the three-part harmony to the gospel choir.
Yes. Soprano, alto, and tenor.
Right. And for a listener who, maybe enjoys music but doesn't necessarily know the music theory behind it, what does that leap from a two-part to a three-part harmony actually mean for the listener's experience? Like, why is that such a massive game changer?
It changes the entire architecture of the sound. When you only have unison or two parts, the sound is relatively thin. It's direct, but it lacks a certain physical weight.
Huh.
By organizing a choir into three distinct parts, Dr. Clark essentially built chords with human voices.
Wow.
So you have the sopranos taking the high, soaring melody. The altos provide that rich, grounding middle layer, and then the tenors add a completely different texture and tension underneath it all.
That makes so much sense.
When those three parts lock in together, it creates what we now recognize as that massive wall of sound. It physically resonates differently in the room. If you listen to a modern gospel choir today, and you feel that overwhelming, enveloping energy—
You're listening to her blueprint.
Exactly. You are listening to a structure pioneered by Dr. Mattie Moss Clark.
There's actually a comparison in the presentation from a gospel artist named Rudy Hawkins, and he compares her to Johann Sebastian Bach.
That is a massive statement.
It really is. Bach is obviously a foundational architect for classical choral music, so positioning Dr. Clark as the equivalent for the African-American gospel choir is huge. But it wasn't just the notes she wrote, right? It was how she demanded they be sung. The notes mention she completely eschewed a polite, restrained sound for something much more vibrant and aggressive. She demanded a fully open throat from her singers.
That vocal technique is so crucial to her signature sound. In traditional classical choral music, the goal is often a very pure, blended, and sometimes very restrained tone.
Right. Very polite.
Exactly.
Wow.
And Dr. Clark flipped that. By demanding a fully open throat, she was pushing the volume and the emotional projection to their absolute limits. She was willing to sacrifice a little bit of that classical purity to achieve close, tight harmonies delivered with crisp rhythms and just maximum power.
It wasn't passive singing.
Not at all. It was an aggressive declaration.
And looking at her resume, that aggressive dedication clearly paid off. She wrote over 1,000 songs over her 69 years.
1,000 songs.
It's unbelievable, and 3 of them were certified gold. Climbing Up the Mountain, Wonderful, Wonderful, and Salvation is Free. She recorded over 30 albums and even founded the Mattie Moss Clark Conservatory of Music in Detroit to institutionalize that teaching. What about her influence beyond her own direct recordings?
Her legacy is deeply generational. She famously shaped her 5 daughters into the Clark Sisters, a group that completely revolutionized contemporary gospel on their own.
Oh, absolutely.
She also mentored her nephew, Jay Moss, and her granddaughter, Kiara Kiki Sherd. But if we pull back and look at the broader context of her life, there's a profound structural lesson here for the listener.
Lay it on us.
She was operating in a heavily male-dominated era. To become the longest-serving international minister of music for the Church of God in Christ, often referred to as Kuajic, she had to navigate and ultimately disrupt the existing power structures.
Yeah.
She had to stand incredibly strong to fulfill her calling. True transformation requires bold changes.
It really is a perfect thematic bridge. Taking an existing, somewhat limited structure, whether that's a 2-part choir arrangement or an institutional hierarchy, and actively disrupting it to breathe new life into it. That concept anchors the primary sermon delivered by Pastor Jeffrey West. And before we dig into the theology of it, the source material includes this incredibly relatable behind-the-scenes detail. He wasn't even supposed to be the one speaking that morning.
No, he wasn't. He was actually filling in.
Right.
His wife was originally scheduled to preach, but she got so busy operating with the servant spirit, taking care of various tasks and responsibilities around the church, that the preaching assignment simply slipped her mind.
Which is just so funny and relatable. It's a very human moment that adds a layer of authenticity to the whole service.
It really does.
Add to that, he was recovering from being sick that week. So you have a speaker who is physically drained, stepping in at the last minute, and yet the energy he brought to the delivery was massive.
Huge energy.
And he anchored the message in a very cinematic biblical text. Ezekiel 37, the Valley of Dry Bones.
Such a powerful image.
For those who might not be familiar with the imagery, God places the prophet Ezekiel in the middle of a valley filled with dry, scattered bones. It's a scene of total desolation and fragmentation. And God asks Ezekiel this profound question. He says, "Can these bones live?"
And Ezekiel's response to that question is just a masterclass in humility.
Yeah.
Instead of trying to logic his way through it or give a definitive yes or no, he simply says, "Thou knowest."
Right.
He acknowledges that God's perspective and capability completely supersede human limitation.
Wow.
But the critical pivot in the text is that God does not just snap his fingers and fix the situation for him.
No.
He requires Ezekiel's active participation.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The required participation is fascinating. He tells Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones.
Yes.
The overarching theme of this sermon series is, hope is not lost. Prophesy. You cannot expect someone else to speak life into your situation. You have to use your own voice to speak to your dry bones.
Right, and if we look at the actual mechanism of what happens next, Ezekiel speaks the word, and there's a specific sequence of events.
Walk us through it.
It's highly analytical if you break it down. So first, there's obedience. Then there's a noise. Then a shaking. The bones start coming together, bone to bone.
Wow.
Then sinew and flesh cover them. What you are witnessing is a structural assembly. The scattered pieces of a life are being put back into the correct order.
But there's a catch.
There's a major catch. The text explicitly notes a vital detail. Despite having perfect physical form, there was no breath in them.
I think that specific detail, having form without breath, is something a lot of people listening right now can identify with.
Absolutely.
You can spend years assembling the bones of your life. You get the right job, you find the relationship, you establish a healthy daily routine. Everything looks perfectly structured from the outside, but you still wake up feeling completely hollow or dead inside.
You have the form, but no life.
Exactly. That is such a huge takeaway. Structure without spirit is just a routine. Building the framework of a good life isn't enough. You have to actively breathe purpose into it, which is why Ezekiel's job wasn't finished just because the bodies were assembled.
Right. He then had to prophesy to the wind.
And having form without life isn't enough. Ezekiel then had to prophesy to the wind, representing the Spirit or the power of God.
Exactly. He had to command the wind from the four corners to breathe actual life into those assembled bodies. It was only after that second spoken command that they stood up as an exceeding great army.
So how does the sermon translate that ancient sequence into something the listener can use on a Tuesday morning? There's a lot of focus on how we talk to ourselves, specifically avoiding what Pastor West terms spiritual suicide.
Right. Spiritual suicide. In this context, it refers to assassinating our own potential through negative self-talk.
Wow.
When you feel dry or fragmented, the temptation is to verbalize that defeat. I'm never going to get out of debt. My career is over. This relationship is doomed.
We've all done it.
We all do it. The challenge presented here is to cast down those negative thoughts and start speaking life, speaking what God speaks, over your own situation. You cannot sit back in the valley and wait for someone else to assemble your pieces.
You have to use your own voice.
Exactly. You have to move from a place of just walking through the motions to a place of running with purpose.
And that forward momentum ties directly into the mechanics of what the sermon calls increase.
Yes.
The subtopic here is God causes the increase. Now, usually when we hear the word increase, we think of adding a little bit more to our baseline, a slight bump in salary, a new friend, a slightly better mood. But the source material defines increase much more broadly.
It defines it as growth, expansion, multiplication, and advancement.
Multiplication, that's the key word.
It is. There is a profound theological distinction made here regarding how we calculate that growth. The sermon points out that humans inherently deal in addition and algebra. We look at our resources, we add them up, 1 + 1 is 2, and we try to calculate a logical trajectory. But God deals in multiplication.
Which completely defies human math.
Totally. From one seed, God can bring a whole harvest. From one spark, a massive fire. It shifts the expectation from incremental gain to exponential transformation.
But, and there is a but, the friction point for most people is that exponential transformation rarely happens overnight.
Never.
There is a reference to 1 Corinthians 3.6 where it says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. That implies a very specific timeline.
Yes, it does.
There is seed time, and then there is a period of watering, and only then is there harvest time. You have to wait on God's timing.
Which brings us to the psychology of waiting. The process requires an incredible amount of patience. And the sermon points to Romans 5 to outline a specific psychological progression. It states that tribulation works patience, patience brings experience, and experience brings hope.
The waiting period is usually where people abandon the process entirely. They just tap out.
They do.
And Pastor West shared a really relatable analogy about public transportation that I think just hits home. He compared people to someone waiting for a bus. They get so frustrated and impatient standing at the bus stop that they decide to just hitch a ride with a stranger instead.
Just to get moving.
Right. But the danger of bypassing the waiting phase, of trying to skip the patience required, is that you forfeit the experience.
And without that earned experience, you do not have the foundational resilience required to maintain hope when the next tribulation inevitably arrives.
You just crumble.
Exactly. If you bypass patience, you lose the experience required to maintain hope. You have to develop actionable faith.
Actionable faith. I love that. And to illustrate that, he shares the biblical story of the man at the pool of Bethesda.
Oh, this is a great example.
For context, this is a man who has been waiting for healing for years. Jesus approaches him and essentially asks him why he was just sitting there complaining about having no one to help him into the water.
Right, because the tradition at that pool was that an angel would periodically come down and stir up or trouble the water.
And the first one in gets healed.
Yes. So this man was completely dependent on an external event and on other people to carry him.
He was waiting for the perfect conditions. And the takeaway presented here is incredibly blunt. Don't wait for the water to be troubled. Start troubling the water yourself.
Yes. Get moving.
If you want to get to the next stage of your life, you have to initiate movement.
It demands a completely active posture. You cannot be a passive consumer of your own life.
Yeah.
And that active posture extends to how we prepare our mindset on a daily basis.
Oh, the sports fan analogy.
Yes. The sermon used this brilliant analogy comparing the behavior of sports fans to the behavior of people seeking personal or spiritual growth.
This was such a fantastic observation. He pointed out that when people go to a football game or a basketball game, the level of preparation is intense.
Oh yeah, they are ready.
They get hyped up days in advance. They arrive at the stadium, they get their hot dogs, their drinks, their fries, all perfectly set up in their lap so they do not miss a single second of the action. They bring an immense amount of expectation to an entertainment event.
Right.
But then those exact same individuals will walk into an environment of worship or sit down to work on their personal growth completely flat and unprepared.
The contrast is just staggering. It highlights a fundamental flaw in how we approach transformation. You have to prepare your mindset to receive a miracle. You can't just walk into a room spiritually or emotionally dry and wait passively. You have to bring your own expectation to the table.
And part of bringing that expectation is being willing to actively speak into the dark areas of your own life.
Yes.
There is a memorable anecdote shared in the source material about a young man named Bobby who was preaching a Friday night service.
Right, about the light bills.
Yes. He decided to get up and preach specifically about light bills.
It sounds incredibly mundane, but the theological application was so profound. He told the congregation that if they fall on hard times and their electricity gets cut off, they shouldn't just sit in the dark complaining about the utility company.
Right.
He pointed them back to the very beginning of the biblical text, Genesis 1:3, where it says, "Let there be light."
So good.
The core message Bobby was conveying, which Pastor West reinforced, is that God always provides a way to speak light into your confusion, your depression, or your uncertainty. You have the authority to speak light into your own house.
Literally and figuratively, you do not have to sit quietly and dwell in the dark, which perfectly sets up the concept of the great exchange that occurs during the altar call at the end of the service.
Yes, the altar call.
Where Pastor West invites people to make a definitive exchange. But what is crucial here, and where so many people get tripped up, is the explicit instruction that you do not need to get your life together before making this exchange.
That is exactly where the friction is for most people. They feel like they need to clean up their act, fix their habits, and arrange their own dry bones before they are worthy of asking for help.
But if you could do it yourself, you wouldn't need help.
Exactly. The logical flaw pointed out in the sermon is brilliant. If you possess the ability to completely get your life together on your own, you wouldn't need a savior in the first place.
Your life would already be perfectly structured.
Right. The great exchange is not about presenting a perfect resume. It is about taking the faith of a mustard seed, submitting to God's will, and letting God handle the responsibility of the outcome while you handle the obedience.
You do the speaking, you let God handle the assembling. And sometimes the evidence that the assembly process has started is incredibly small.
Very small.
We talked earlier about Pastor West being sick that week. He shared a personal testimony from that very week about how he handled it.
Right.
Following scriptural precedent, he had the elders of the church pray over him with oil. He went home, and he noted that afterward, he only sneezed a few times.
Now, a pure skeptic might look at that and say, well, the prayer didn't work because you still sneeze.
Right, you're still sneezing.
But instead of complaining, he said, thank you, Lord. He didn't view those few sneezes as a failure of the process. He recognized those small shifts as evidence of God moving.
It reminds me of the biblical imagery of seeing a cloud the size of a man's hand in a completely clear sky. It's tiny, but it is enough evidence to know that a massive rainstorm is incoming.
Exactly. When you start applying these principles, you have to train yourself to notice those small winds.
Right.
That is the wind starting to blow in your specific valley.
If we synthesize this entire journey, the themes interlock beautifully.
They really do.
From the structural musical changes of Dr. Mattie Moss Clark back in the 20th century, actively disrupting the norm to create a generational sound,
Right.
to the spiritual structural changes of Ezekiel's dry bones,
Yeah.
the central theme is clear. Growth requires your active voice, incredible patience, and a willingness to let God multiply your efforts.
It is the shift from human addition to divine multiplication.
As we wrap up this special Transformation Talks deep dive, we want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your week.
Take this with you.
If you are currently standing in your own valley of dry bones right now, staring at a completely fragmented situation, maybe it's your career, your relationships, or your health, are you waiting for someone else to assemble the pieces for you? Or are you ready to open your mouth and command the wind?
It ultimately comes down to a question of agency. The pieces will not begin to move until you decide to speak.
That is a powerful place to land. We hope this deep dive into Beauty for Ashes Pt.2 has equipped you with some serious, actionable tools for your week.
Absolutely.
If you found value in this conversation, please take a second to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss out when we extract these insights.
And remember, community is a vital component of the growth process.
Yes, it is. We would enthusiastically love for you to join the community live on the Transformation Ministries VB YouTube channel or their Facebook page every single Sunday at 10:00 a.m.
Bring that sports fan energy.
Yes. Come prepared. And if today's deep dive sparked your spirit, you are highly encouraged to watch the replay of the entire Beauty for Ashes PT2 sermon. You can find that right now on the Transformation Ministries YouTube channel. Go get the full experience. Thanks for hanging out with us, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.